this is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. In my view, we're all in it together this time. It's not black versus white, old versus young, male versus female, east versus west, whatever. We're all in it together against the ruling elite class that controls all money and requires everyone else to be in debt in order to have liquidity and live.
That's right. There should be no financialization without representation.
Metaphor.
The U.S. Fed and the government are trying to force American consumers to take on more mortgage debt, and the IMF is trying to force them to force those consumers to take on more mortgage debt. Housing crisis worse than Great Depression. 7 shocking facts about the U.S. housing market. Well, number one is Zillow has announced that the average price of a home in the U.S. is about 8% lower than it was a year ago, and that it continues to fall about 1% per month.
Look, the house price situation is not going to get any better as long as incomes keep deteriorating. I just saw an interesting statistic that 1% of Americans own the same wealth as the bottom 90% of Americans. And income in America is collapsing because, remember, the global banksters, including the IMF, they want income levels in China and America to be about the same.
GDP per capita in the U.S., and that is in the blue. And then you see the median household income in red. And as you see from 2000 as well, GDP per capita in the U.S. grew straight up. Income went down.
That's right.
So Americans were earning less and less every year as the housing bubble took off to historic proportions. You've never seen anything like this at all in the United States.
That's right. The debt levels increased as income went down.
Yeah.
At the top of the cycle, the banks swooped in. They took all the equity out that they had extracted using derivatives. They left the consumer with all the debt. Then Barack Obama was elected president, and he came into office, and the first thing he did was he matched the wealth confiscation of the creditors by giving them $20 trillion more in bailout money. So they doubled their illegal bets and put the consumer into twice the income impairment by now having hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of debt hanging over their head.
If I know something about your financial situation that you don't, and I don't disclose that, that's a material omission. So if I don't say to you, Mr. Smith, you know, you keep your savings in this bank, and we're using your savings to loan money to J.P. Morgan Chase to move all these jobs abroad. In fact, all the jobs for your food stamp government contract, we're moving to India. So you as a taxpayer are going to fund these jobs. Your deposits are moving these jobs, and when we get these jobs all moved in another 3 to 5 years, you'll probably lose your job. Okay? We don't tell you any of that. We just say, here's more debt. Now, under the law, I believe that there's a case to be made that that's fraudulent inducement. Fraudulent inducement is if I encourage you to take on debt and fail to disclose something that I know that you don't. That's a material omission under the law. It's illegal. Okay? Now, if that's the case, just speaking as the former Assistant Secretary of Housing, the vast majority of mortgages originated in the United States after 1996 were fraudulently induced. Now, we can all say that. Even, let's say the Supreme Court decides tomorrow they're all fraudulently induced. The reality is our pension funds own them. So we just sold our fraudulently induced mortgages into the pension funds, and if we can't pay off those mortgages, then guess what happens to our retirement savings?
What happens when they can't pay off their debt? This is kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, well, once again, language is being abused here. They're saying, or talking about the people and their debt. It's not the people's debt. Those people don't have the debt. The bankers gave them their debt, OPD. They're suffering from other people's debts. It's not their debt. That's why they're having a revolution.
This is the big problem here, is the debt written on the bonds which French and German banks own. So they own Greek sovereign debt, but they have insured themselves. And who has insured them? Who's provided that insurance? but American banks. And they apparently are exposed to this Greek, Portugal, and Irish debt by up to about $129 billion, which is real cash they'll have to hand over to these European banks.
But at the same time, the Basel requirements are trying to get banks to increase their capital ratios. Here you have this cluster bomb of debt explosions between Europe and Greece, which could wipe out $127 billion on balance sheets in America. And this is really an interesting showdown in the global financial war, isn't it? Because you've got insurance and bonds versus CDS products in the U.S. We've seen this played out with the AIG scandal, the subprime scandal, and every aspect of the past 3 years, financial collapse, the controlled demolition. And depending on who sits at where during the collapsing financial system depends on who survives. Now, apparently, the key here is not to have Greece actually default, because then American banks would suffer catastrophic losses as compared to European banks. And this, of course, cannot be communicated to the American people because nobody in Congress actually knows what a CDS is or even what a bond is, for that matter.
In inflation numbers. So the inflation numbers you deduct from your GDP.
That's right. So if they need to, they will readjust it again to make it look like something that it's not, which is a viable, growing economy. This is something that the U.S. government does very well. They statistically lie.
And so, you know, in a casino gulag state, the casino has that precise little algorithm that when they need to let somebody win at the slot machine, and so they continue in this cycle of spirals of debts and bad behavior. Well, here is Saudi Prince Al-Walid bin Talal being interviewed, and he's asked about the price of oil and is it too high.
The state position of Saudi Arabia, we want the price to be between 70 and 80, not only to help the West, but also to help ourselves. We don't want the West to go and find alternatives, because clearly the higher price oil goes, the more you have incentive to go and find alternatives. So really, our interest coincides with American interest, to have the price of oil around 70, 80, which is the price good for consumers and producers.
And a great example of the casino gulag mentality. They know that there's a sweet spot where Americans will continue to bankrupt themselves simultaneously. And the casino gulag model is a good reference point. You know, the casino economics, you know, they get that perfect mix of winning percentages from the slot machines, alcohol, and oxygen. Now, they adjust the level of oxygen and the alcohol in the drinks and the winning percentages at the slot machines to keep people in a maximum state of loss, of money loss. And those are just three of the factors that go into the algorithms that drive the casino. Now these people drive the U.S. economy. They know by keeping gas at a certain price, they can continue to put policies in place that are part of the prison industrial complex and the Pentagon and the militarization of the economy, and totally ignore the fact that at the end of the day, folks are going bankrupt and they're eating mud pies like the folks they screwed in Haiti.
Most people in America understand about a football bet. If you're going to be a serious bettor, you got to know what the line is. You got to know how many points you're going to get or how many points you're going to give. And that's, I think, where we can start drawing the analogies is your all's jobs. You all were trying to make a market, and staying close to home was trying to get the line right. When the bookie gets too many bets on MU, if MU is getting points, he gives fewer points to MU to move more bettors over to KU, and vice versa. The bookie moves the line in order to even out the bets. So the perfect bookie who makes a lot of money is somebody who just gets the VIG. And depending on whether you're betting in an office pool that's illegal or whether you're betting in Las Vegas, the VIG is going to vary anywhere from 5 to 10%. Generally speaking, and I don't know who the right person is to ask this, what is your VIG, Mr. Sparks, on these deals? What is the VIG you make, assuming all you're doing, not playing in the market, but all you're doing is trying to stay close to home like a bookie would try to do in order to minimize their risk?
Senator, can I just, instead of using the bookie analogy, just talk about, I think your question about profit.
Have you personally spoken with anybody at Treasury about the regulatory reform effort?
Oh, since the beginning, not.
Let me rephrase the question. Have you, in the last 6 to 9 months, had conversations with people at Treasury about the regulatory reform effort?
I might have, but
I'm going to keep using that word because I want you to understand what's in the customer's minds. Right. That you don't think it's junk. You don't think it's crap. You don't think it's shitty.
Well, it depends on how you mean that. We might.
How I mean it. These are your employees who believe it.
Can I explain? We think
if your employees think that it's crap, that it's a shitty deal, do you think that Goldman Sachs ought to be selling that to customers? And when you are on the short side betting against it, I think it's a very clear conflict of interest. And I think we got to deal with it. Now, you don't, apparently.
I do not necessarily think that's the case.
And when you heard that your employees in these emails, when looking at these deals, said, God, what a shitty deal. God, what a piece of crap. When you hear your own employees or read about those in the emails, do you feel anything?
I think that's very unfortunate to have on email.
Are you embarrassed?
And very unfortunate. I don't.
On
again,
email, it's
please don't take that.
How about feeling that way?
I think it's very.